to...
Right, everybody, I think it's just gone 12, so let's make a start. So welcome, first off, to this session, which is about industry and logistics. I think it's a really good opportunity to reflect on changes in the sector and then also how we're responding to that. My name is Tim Cutts, and I'm Senior Regeneration Manager at Southwark Council in the Old Kent Road Planning and Growth team. So I come from a local authority background. And with me, I've got three fantastic panellists. So I've got Bridget Outram, who's the Director of the South East Industrial Team at Savills. We have Robin Woodbridge, who is Senior Vice President, Head of Capital Deployment UK at Prologis. And then Adrian Howells, who is the Senior Development Director at GLP UK. And just to kick us off, what I would like our three panellists to do is to set the scene. Because certainly where I work in Southwark, we've seen kind of enormous change over the last 2 or 3 years in the industrial and logistics sector. Massive growth in demand, yields have come down, rents are going up to the point that we have industrial sites which are competing in value with residential developments. We've got one site which is with a residential consent for over 300 units, and it's now switching to an industrial use, which is kind of I haven't seen in my kind of 20 odd years working in Southwark. So first off, just thinking about the state of the sector, who's looking for space, what kind of space are they looking for? Perhaps Adrienne, if I could come to you first.
Thank you very much. So some of you might not know the name GLP, and as Tim said, the sector's changing. And GLP has been traditionally a specialist in big box logistics, so those units over 100,000 square feet. And upwards, so a million square feet isn't unusual for us to be building. However, it's definitely changing, and so we now have a number of developments within London, which are on the smaller end of the market. So this is more new to us than perhaps some of our competitors. So. Who's looking for space? Well, who isn't looking for space? You've got your traditional occupiers, parcel hubs, your Amazons, your third-party logistics providers, but we're also seeing an increase in different types of uses as well that can make use of an industrial type space. So film studios, for example, there's obviously a thriving film studio businesses within certain parts of London, and also things like TV shopping channels, would you believe? So there's all sorts of different uses alongside the mainstream that we're definitely seeing, in particular in those London regions. Outside London, it's the more traditional kind of retailers, 3PLs, e-commerce, but that's certainly what we're seeing.
Thanks, Adrian. Perhaps Robin?
Yeah, hi everybody. Look, London's got a problem, and I think we all probably know it. To be helpful, so have other global cities that we work in. They've got a similar problem. It's very, very different to what we're seeing maybe in Birmingham or Manchester or wherever, where you can service the city from the edge of the city. You can't do that in London. It's too congested, it's too big. We've just come from the main auditorium where we've been talking about everything but logistics. We mustn't forget it, because it's how we get everything that we eat, that we consume, that we wear. How do you service that city? And so I'm very much focused primarily, I suppose, at the logistics end of the sector, and that's probably where the biggest change has occurred. But through industrial sites being repositioned for other uses, predominantly residential, but for the Olympics or for Crossrail or whatever, we've seen a massive loss. We all know that. And on top of that, we're seeing local occupiers being displaced because, as you touched on, Tim, the rents have gone ballistic. I don't think, I've been in the sector 30 years, I don't think I'd ever see a day where we've seen now office rents below industrial rents in certain parts of London. I don't think I'd ever think that would happen, but it's happened. I think it's not going to go away. This problem's not going to go away. We will start to find that people can't order what they want and get it when they want. We need to make sure that we provide the right facilities for the right type of customer use in the right space. And, that isn't always mixed use. That will cover some of the customer base, but it won't cover all of them. And I think we've got to learn and grow up pretty quickly, actually. We are going to see intensification, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But just like all the other sectors, we're also struggling with the market's moved dramatically in the last 2 or 3 months. We've seen capital values drop quite considerably. That's going to put pressure on maybe new typologies of building and how they fit in. So there's huge pressure on London. We are genuinely, I think, as a sector, trying really hard to solve that. But we've got some headwinds as well coming onto us in the short term.
And perhaps a question for you, Bridget. I mean, how well do you feel that we kind of understand the sector? Both, I suppose, from a public perspective and then also in kind of local authorities.
I'm sorry, Tim, but probably not very well, or not well enough. I don't mean that personally, obviously. I think that the planning policy, or the people who are setting planning policy, don't really understand logistics and distribution or the industrial sector full stop. I mean, you mentioned that you're a regeneration specialist, and sort of regeneration, that word makes me really nervous as somebody who's in the industrial sector, because what it tends to mean to most of those people who are in control of regeneration, it usually means scraping away industrial and putting something else there in its place, and that has been the policy of regeneration for many, many years. And the reason I come to conferences like this is so to beat the B8 drum and say that has to stop. So the planning use class B8 is the sector which Amazon uses. Its logistics, its storage and distribution. It is a sector which some planners look at in horror when we say we want to build B8. They say, oh no, we don't want that. That means an ugly industrial building, which it could not be further from the truth. You've just got to look at the GLP website or the Prologis website to see sort of the quality of buildings that they can build. But the B8 sector is a new utility service. So you would not build housing without providing electricity and water and waste services, but for the people who are coming through, the younger generation, they want to be able to order in their food, and they want to be able to order in, their goods, from their iPhones. And therefore, you have to have that delivery network that supports residential. And there's rightly a focus on providing residential. Absolutely, there should be, but not without the support services that it needs, and that's B8. And so, what I'm describing is the problem which Robin mentioned, which is there's just not enough space for all of this to happen. But I think that there are solutions to it, and hopefully we'll go on to that shortly.
Okay. Adrian?
Yeah, absolutely. So alongside the British Property Federation and Savills, GLP were involved in a report that was published earlier this year, The Logic of Logistics. It's a very interesting read on the BPF website if anyone's interested, about how do we look at this and how do we adequately plan for the future. I think historically local authorities have looked almost backwards at demand and then allocated space on history. But what they hadn't really taken into account, and what hadn't been so obvious, was that there was a suppressed demand where, because we've had constrained supply for a number of years, occupiers and customers couldn't find what they needed in the right place, so they were going elsewhere and they were displaced elsewhere. And that hadn't been taken into account. So by looking backwards and providing a similar amount of space, you weren't taking that into account. I think the biggest area was outside of London, but in the Doncaster-Leeds region, it was something like 27% suppressed demand that just wasn't taken into account. And if that's repeated across every area and every region, then we're going to have a massive undersupply. And as Bridget said, every time you click and you want to buy something online, or you're food shopping, or you don't want your food shopping delivered in 3 days, we need to have those services on your doorstep, basically. So they have to go together. The BPF also did another report a couple of years ago, which looked at the number of houses that were required each year to be built and what that equated to in a logistics floor space. Now, I didn't think we were going to go this direction. I can't remember exactly what the figure was, but it just goes to show that we have been looking as an industry, working together to look at what that ratio is between housing and the logistics that is needed to service that going forward. We also shouldn't forget about the social value that a logistics development can bring, the additional jobs, the additional benefits that it can bring to a local area that a logistics development sits in. The one that we did, the first report that we did in social value that we looked at for a building in Bedford, delivered £5 million of additional social value to the immediate local area, be it through local construction jobs, future jobs, benefits that we brought from the construction industry in terms of food bank donations, employing local people, apprenticeships in that local area. So none of this should really be overlooked as an industry, what we bring.
I just think on that social value point, it's really well made, and we like you have been working on our supply chain, so trying to get them to do things and calculate that social value. But we reckon if we can start to influence our customers, it's like another 80% on top. And we're starting to try and do that and to attract people into the sector. We're training people now from open prisons. We've had Afghan and Ukrainian refugees we're training. We're intercepting the drugs county lines. And I've met the policeman who meets people at 3 in the morning and says, if I can offer you a different career, which won't leave you and your family at danger, would you take it? And I think if we can start to influence the training route for people into the sector, and it's a sector once you're into it, you can go, it's referred to, somebody recently referred to it a bit like retail a few years ago, that you join, it's still got the pathways to very senior level, and logistics is like that. And I think, you know, that's creating huge social value. So if we can start to get into that better, link our customers to areas where people are looking for work, and then give the whole breadth of what the sector offers around. I think the biggest area where people are needed within logistics at the moment is coding. People who code the systems that either make the route of goods the most optimal, or they look at robotics, or they're looking at other forms of automation. That's where the biggest gaps are, or the biggest number of demand. There's a lot more to the sector than people realise.
Okay, and moving on then to the strategies that we're using in local government to try to allocate, allocate sufficient space for industry and logistics. So the London plan is very much pushing us towards intensification, and that's something that we're pursuing in Southwark. We've got our first 2 multi-storey industrial schemes, which should be coming in for planning, I hope, fairly soon. What's your take on the kind of the potential for multi-storey space to help meet some of the need for this kind of industrial and logistics?
So look, in my mind, it's coming. It's going to come. It's not a case of if, it is when. If we look at somewhere like Japan, where for Prologis in Japan, for the last 20 years, every building we built is multi-level. They don't build anything other than multi-level. But that was influenced, I think, effectively by government in a much more progressive, driven way. And the London plan is seeking to do that with density at the moment, but really it's not multi-level, it's just a bit more density, which in itself can be some problems, and we can chat about that in a minute. So I think it is coming. That being said, it's really difficult. And I mean really difficult, because it's not... Taking experiences from other building types will get you so far, but ultimately we live in a world where our customers take space because it works, operationally and efficiency. That's all they're really interested in. Yes, we're in a world where we're trying to deliver better outcomes for the staff, and we're delivering better outcomes for the communities. We're trying to deliver more attractive buildings. But ultimately, you can do all of that, but if the building doesn't work, they won't take it. You know, I used to joke about, you'd see a building where somebody put a triangular yard on it, and funnily enough, it doesn't let. You know, it's about efficiency. And I think that, to me, we're going to get some things that go wrong. We're going to get people building stuff that may not work. And then it's a case of, well, what is it you're building it for? Are you building it, as Bridget touched on, is it for logistics? Or is it for industrial? Or is it, for want of a better description, makerspace? Because they want very, very different things. So, and the reason a lot of us here are talking about logistics is that, dare I say, in terms of amount of square footage and the real need, that's the big one. And if anyone can give me really accurate data on that, but I know from the inquiries and all the people we're talking to and everything, that's the big one. Does anybody, who came up on the lift just now?
I was going to say.
Did you press the button and nothing happened? Because that's what happens with lifts. We'll wait. If your job is moving stuff and you are paid by how fast you move it, and you're waiting for a lift, it's a bloody nightmare. And what if that lift breaks down? You can't get any other way around it. So, you know, we had an asset, people may or may not have seen it, called Gillinder Street or Bow Yard, it was branded as in East London, which would have been lifts. Feedback we got, and it's really interesting this, I think when you ask customers a theoretical question, you get one answer. When you ask them a real question, you get another. So a good example is Intuit, when they asked everybody when do they do their tax returns, and everyone said a month before. And then they looked at the data and everyone did it the day before. It's a bit like this with what we found out. So we showed people this building, great building, loads of this, that and the other, but lifts. And the feedback we had from our logistics customers is they were really nervous. They didn't like it at all because they said, well, what if it goes wrong?
Having come from a retailer, working for a retailer for 12 years before I did hardcore logistics, the lifts is just one that I don't know how we're going to get around, because that time is money for everyone. And if you click on your online shopping and you expect same day or next day delivery and their lift breaks down, then they're not going to be fulfilling their customers' requirements. So for our customers, who are potentially our e-commerce retailers, we're not helping them fulfill their customers' requirements either. So it's a real conundrum. And if you're wanting to put ramps in, they're nervous about ramps. Plus you need more land for ramps. You've got to get, you know, your two-way HGV traffic, have it one way, then you've got stops and starts. Again, time is money. We're not moving into a world where people want things, you know, more expensive and slower. We're moving into a world where people want things cheaper and quicker. So we've got some definite challenges. But like Robin says, we also have buildings across Asia. They're all multi-storey. So it can be done, but there's a lot of work for us as an industry to do to be able to convince our customers that that's the right way. The right way to go for the UK and for London.
And Adrian, you are developing a multi-storey scheme, I understand, in Docklands, is that?
We've got a multi-storey scheme in for planning in the Docklands. It's one that my colleague looks after, but that has been in for planning for as long as I've worked for GLP, which is 4 years. So we have other challenges. We've designed it, we've spoken to customers, we understand that it works, we've got the ramps designed that don't freeze in winter, so the HGVs aren't going to slide down them, which was, you know, some concerns and feedbacks. We've got 2 ways they can go. We've solved all of those problems, but we haven't quite solved the planning conundrum yet.
And, I mean, Robin, very briefly, you said that in Japan or in the Far East, it's driven by the public sector or local authorities.
Yeah, look, and there are some lift buildings in Japan and Tokyo, but they are pretty small. The bigger facilities are ramped vehicle access to every floor. They, as I understand it, the first sites were sort of almost reclaimed and by the government and sort of said to somebody, okay, if you want this site, you've got to go and do this on it. And that created a market, but they were bigger. And this is the other bit, if you are going to try and get vehicle access to every floor, it needs a certain amount of land. You can't do that on 2 acres, for instance. You need, we think, probably 5. And a certain shape as well. And we've tried every which way and every combination and how does that work and trying to, so we've been working on it for 4 years in the UK with all the experience we've got. And it's difficult, it's really difficult. And then on top of it, as a sector that probably has got used to being able to react and build a building in 9 months maybe, and be quite fleet of foot in how it deploys capital, we're suddenly now making a decision to go ahead and get planning, which could take a long time, then go and deliver a building that's probably going to take a couple of years to deliver. We're getting, and dare I say it, we're getting into a world where other sectors have been for quite a while, and we're having to learn how we deal with that. But when you first go and build a £400-500 million multi-level building for London, your investors and backers have got to be 100% behind that because it's a new product that hasn't necessarily worked, and the very few buildings, things like X2, got a very bad press. I think there's reasons for that. It came out in the middle of the global financial crisis and they tried to get a premium rent, which maybe wasn't, with hindsight, the best thing to do. But it's going to be difficult. Let's be under no illusions. And at the moment, I don't think there's any other option, frankly, for London. If somebody's got it, come and tell me, because I'm really interested.
Okay, and perhaps I'd like to get your views on mixed use as well. So in Southwark, down on Ilderson Road, we've got our first logistics B8 space, which is now on site, sitting beneath a 28-storey residential tower. So it's been built by Barratt. It's got kind of 8-metre high floor to ceilings at ground floor. It's got an internal loading area. You can drive an articulated truck through it. So it has been designed specifically for kind of logistics distribution. I think, Bridget, you were involved in that scheme.
I briefed the residential architect who designed that, and it was a difficult process. I mean, I think it's really interesting listening to you two, right? So these are experts in the industrial development field, you know, and they are describing how difficult it is to do industrial buildings well in London, okay? So ring alarm bells, you know, as policymakers when the residential developers come along and start saying they can build industrial underneath their residential schemes, you know. So well, the point of me standing or being on this stage today is to make the point that use class E, the makerspace, is inadequate as industrial space in London. It is just not providing at all the right specification of space that we need. And also with that, the mixed use, you know. Tim, you're London Borough, okay? The first thing that happened with that scheme was that you slapped hours of use restrictions on the B8 space. So I would ask you, so what's the point in building brand new industrial space when you have to constrain it? So was that actually in the right place to put industrial then, if it has to then to be constrained by the planning system in that way? So how many people in the room would buy a house where you had a midnight curfew? Yeah, sure, most nights of the week we're all home by midnight, but there'll be a few nights where you might get lucky and have a good night out, and you might want to go beyond midnight. So are you actually going to buy that house, or would you pay less for that house? And I think actually you're just not going to buy that house. So when industrial buildings are built to a poor specification, they've got, I mean, that one was the best that could possibly be done in the constrained circumstances. And frankly, you know, it's not good enough for us. Our industrial occupiers deserve way better than that. So squeezing sheds back into mixed-use schemes, you know, is not the way forward. And I think that planning policy should be providing for more of a master plan effect. If that area is better off as a residential area, then that's absolutely fine, because you know, that may be the case, and we're not going to disagree with that. But actually, I think there should be a better plan for moving the industrial to a different location. Not all of it, but part of the problem with Ilderton Road was that we had to shoehorn back in 35,000 square feet. The site was only an acre, which actually an acre is about 43,500 square feet. 35,000 square feet had to be industrial. We'll stick it up onto a few more higher levels. That doesn't really matter, you know. And we're getting this terribly designed space, but, you know, we did it. Why did we do it? Because planning policy said we had to do it so that they could get the consent for the upper floors, which was the important bit. So we don't congratulate ourselves that these mixed-use schemes are providing industrial space for London, because actually it's poor quality, and I'm here to say actually that's not good enough anymore, you know. So the beds and sheds, you know, can only work in certain locations. It can work maybe with industrial developers building the shed part, because you've got half a chance of them doing it well, but certainly not residential developers doing it. And, you know, I'm not trying to say that, you know, we shouldn't allow residential into industrial areas, because I've got 3 adult sons. I'd like them to be able to live in London, you know, so I understand the case for residential. But we've got to think a bit harder and be a bit more intelligent about how we deal with the industrial space that's displaced as a result. And use class E is not the way forward. Absolutely not.
Thanks, Bridget. I mean, you're absolutely right on those hours of use, and we are now agreeing with Barrett's to vary that so that they can operate 24 hours a day. I mean, just turning perhaps to Robin and Adrienne, in a situation like Southwark, where we've, you know, as across London, we've got a housing crisis, we've got housing targets, need to try to provide affordable housing, housing for everyone, and we've also got, you know, very high demand for industrial space. How do we kind of reconcile that? I mean, is there a place for mixed use, or are you as kind of gloomy about it as
look, I think Bridget makes a really good point, and I think we've got to be really careful that it's people. What it does for the right reason. So I think there is a potential to have mixed use, but that's got to be, as I said, sort of. And I don't want to use the E-class, because previously we would love to have B1C, B2, B8. We want all of those, because I don't want to be limited to what I can let my building to a customer to do. What we're basically saying is, well, it's B1C, and actually, but it's logistics. Well, no, it's not. Or what is it? You know, we're not clear on that. If we're putting mixed use together and we're putting in very clearly makerspace, that type of thing that doesn't need to be operating in the middle of the night, isn't making a load of noise, isn't smelly, isn't all the things you don't want to live next to, and actually could create some, you know, a better environment. So there's more going on for people who live there. I get that, but that is relatively small proportion of what the demand out there. If you go down to a typical industrial estate, how many of those are those people? Few, but not that many, some. And then the one that where the real growth, the issue is the logistics side of it. At one end of that's parcel. You know, I was in an Amazon facility last week with our global exec actually, and we walked in, we were there at 11, and the first comment was, are these guys still solvent? Because there was nothing going on, it was empty. It had done its job, that building had started work in the middle of the night and pretty much finished by about 9:30. Now, there was an interesting comment earlier about how could you then use that space, and that's something, I think, you know, there's empty space there for probably half the day. How do we make more use of that? Try having that conversation. That's tricky, but how do we do that? But my point being that these things, we all want to get up in the morning and go and get a cup of coffee or go and get whatever it is we want to do. They have to have done all the work during the night. And the other thing that's happening with rents climbing, the floor plate that people want is getting smaller and smaller. Why hold 2 days stock when you can hold 1 day stock and replenish every night? So basically these things are being filled up every night, emptied in the early morning, filled up every night, emptied in the morning. And that isn't going to go away. And if you haven't got 24-hour, 7-day-a-week access, it won't work. They just won't take it. It's basically unviable and unfundable. So you've got to know what is it you're going to do with it and be comfortable and confident about that.
All right, okay, thank you very much. I mean, at this point, perhaps we'll take some questions from the audience. You, sir?
Osman Dervish Osman Dervish from Kratos Communications. I'm also a councillor in Havering, so North East London. A lot of good conversation about what the challenges are and a lot of discussion around policy. So I guess my question is, while good officers like Tim can come up with policy and, you know, bring that forward, no one talked about the role of the members and councillors in that. So they're the ones that actually have to vote on it and make the decision. So what would the panel's view be on how they should be engaged to understand the industry better, and what would they be doing to make sure councillors, for example, in boroughs like mine, which is an edge of London borough, lots of green space, not much that you can actually build on without making very brave decisions, to understand the industry better and make them want to actually engage with making that sort of policy decision.
Adrienne, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, certainly. So I think the report that I referenced earlier, the logic of logistics, in conjunction with the British Property Federation, that is the beginning of exactly trying to open up those conversations. And as a result of that report, there have been a number of meetings held with local governments and central government to try and just open up that conversation. And the more that we can do that and work together as an industry to then sort of waterfall that down to people like yourselves, then that can only be beneficial for everyone. Because I think there is, as been said, a kind of general lack of understanding about the industry, and perhaps people think back to kind of dirty industrial and horrible, grotty, you know, filthy sheds and things, whereas the reality is it's a very different concept, and we need to change that image. And I think we've kind of moved away from using the word sort of sheds and industrial, and I mean, obviously there's an industrial use class, but logistics, please come and see some of our buildings. We'd love to. I'm sure we'd all love to show you some of our buildings. They really are. I think we're very passionate about our buildings. They look good, they're sustainable, and, you know, perhaps that's a topic we'll come on to. And they're efficient, and they're clean, and they're modern. So please do come and talk to us.
And Bridget, do you think as well that there's scope to kind of emphasise the social value which has been delivered through development kind of better than we're doing at the moment?
I think it's about an education process, isn't it? You know, it's up to your members to come and you know, open their minds to this sector. If they don't understand it, then they've got no business making decisions on it, frankly. You know, so you know. Well, in that case then, but then it's their job then, isn't it, to make sure they're informed about something, because they may have outdated, you know, there's misconceptions all over the place about this sector, and it's actually up to us as an industry to change those perceptions. And the sort of publications we're talking about, they are there, but then, you know, these people have to read them, you know, and this is why we're all here. We would like to have been on the main stage in this conference, for example, today, but we're not. This is, Robin, you've made the point, this is only the second year that the industrial sector's even had a platform here, you know, so we're we've been hidden and kept in the background, but you know, we are a massive sector that contributes hugely to the economy, and we're way more important than some of the policymakers and maybe people's making decisions about us on the planning side actually realise. So you know, we probably have to shout about ourselves a bit more. So, but we'd like local authorities to be more open as well. So we need to give some thought to what we, how we do that.
So,
I think.
so you know, look, it's a really good question, and I think probably our sector has kept its head down a bit. Both our customers and people on the stage, we've just got on with our job, you know. And I think the rise in online, the fact that it gives you the most valuable commodity of all, it gives you time. It's never going to go away. We all have more time because we can buy online. And then the pandemic has turbocharged that. It's dropped back a bit, but it's changed everybody's... We've actually done some research on this, and we know there's been a massive shift pre and post the pandemic to Londoners understanding the link between the need for logistics buildings and online. Pre-COVID, they didn't understand it. Now they do. So, look, we've kept our head down, just got on with life. I think people have just taken it a bit for granted. That world has fundamentally changed. We've been doing a bit of a, for want of a better description, a virtual roadshow, for instance, with a number of boroughs, introducing ourselves to boroughs that we're not in, boroughs we'd like to be in, etc. It was only recently we spoke to a borough, and the chap came back and said, I'd love you to talk to our members. And we're now booked in, I think, for next week to do a presentation to members on the sort of stuff that we're talking about. So, you know, and I know there'll be others in our sector who would, you know, as you say, are really proud about what we do, and our customers are really proud about it. So it's communication, I think.
Sounds like an invitation, Robin.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that's obviously right at the top of the agenda for our members at the moment is the climate emergency.
Yep.
Adrian, can you tell us a bit about how you're kind of addressing the climate emergency? Because again, I think that's something that our politicians would be really interested in.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully Robin and I have slightly different things to say on this, or different views. But from a GLP perspective, our focus over the last couple of years has been having net zero carbon for the construction phase. So 75% of the carbon for an entire building's life cycle will be in the construction phase. So we've been looking at how we reduce that. And we have built now, I think, 3 or 4 net zero carbon for construction buildings, including the latest one, which was 600,000 square feet in Doncaster. So that has been, a real focus for us. But our sustainability journey started something like 30 years ago. It's always been at the heart of everything that we do. But now we've actually got a sort of a certification, if you want, that says, yes, you have achieved net zero carbon for construction. I know that you guys have taken a different approach, or on top.
We've done similar, actually. Look, and I worked at GLP 16 years ago, and took a lot actually from the way that they were set up and their mindset. I think it's 13 years now. Every building we built in the UK, we've reduced the carbon in the embodied carbon, and we've mitigated 5 times that. And we got awarded the Terracotta Seal by now King Charles at COP26. I think we're the only developer to get that award, which we were blown away by. I'm really proud. But the other bit I think we really want to pick up as well. So we need to be, as leaders in our industry, driving everybody. And we're lucky more and more of our competitors are owners. So we're a bit different to maybe the residential crowd, where typically they'll build and sell. There's a rented sector, but more and more of our competition are owners. And even if they're traders who then it gets owned by a fund, the funds want to do the same thing. So as a sector, we're seeing that change. But the other side to it, which is tougher in London, if I'm honest, is what you can do with the building. So our buildings typically got bloody great roofs on them, and we should be covering every single bit of those roofs with photovoltaics. And there are reasons why we're not. As an example, we had a customer who wanted a 6 meg array on their building. The grid couldn't receive that energy for over 2 years. So they said, blow, we're going to go off and do something else. Our network, our power network is completely at odds with what everybody wants to do. It can't receive energy, believe it or not. We did a building for a customer called Cummings in Northampton, in Daventry, sorry. And that building is an EPC A-. It produces more energy than it uses. We only agreed to put the PV on the roof about a week before practical completion. We'd offered them terms at day one, but they ummed and ahed and everything. We then did it. It took us 9 months for Western Power Distribution, in that instance, to agree to receive the power from that building. The grid is screwed, and we need to somehow, and we've been lobbying government to sort that out, because if you can imagine every logistics building, and maybe we get to a phase where we put the cladding, not just the roofs. London's more difficult, particularly if you go multi-level, because you've got more stuff going on in the building and a smaller roof. Whereas you compare that to, say, 1 million square foot or 500,000 square foot big box, you've got a big roof. But as a sector, we can, because of the ownership, the way our ownership, we own the buildings we create, and our customers, I tell you now, if you said to us, we've got a little building we did at Durft as an experiment, one of our schemes, we put about 20% of the regulated energy use of the building on PV on the roof. We put 3 Tesla Powerwalls. It's a 120,000 square foot building. We thought we'd see what happens. That's doubled, or giving us half again what the PV's doing in terms of how much that building was off-grid. It's off-grid 42% of the time, and has been for the last 4 years. How cool would it be to say to a customer now, come and take a building and you're only going to pay for energy 60% of the time. And if we can get that higher, you could almost get to a place where some of these big logistics buildings are self-sufficient, or even putting energy back in, but they're just coming off. That is not that difficult to achieve. Harder in London, as I say, particularly if you start going up in the air, because actually you've got less roof to the amount of volume of building. But I think our sector is really trying to grasp that. And if anything, we're seeing it's the power companies not able to accept the power, believe it or not. And I can give you multiple examples of that.
Yeah, as can I.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, other questions?
Thanks. I'd be interested to get the kind of insight from an industrial developer. So I work in Camden. We have one of our only protected industrial areas. You might know it, Kentish Town. And you were talking so much about how the demand and the prices for logistics are so high. The permission, the application ended up getting withdrawn, was because there was just a massive amount of Class E use, which you were saying is kind of insufficient. And I'm just wondering where the gap is there, because it's protected for industrial. Policy is saying industrial. Demand for logistics is so high. So I'm just wondering. I know it's hard because it's site specific. It's quite a difficult site, but I was just wondering just your insight as to why that might be.
So what, the promoter withdrew their application?
Yeah, because it was going to get refused.
Well,
okay.
well, yeah, but so I've worked with, so it's a residential developer, presumably, that's doing this, is it, that's proposing use Class E?
Well, it's owned by Murphy's.
Yeah, so, but are they making their own application? It's not a developer that's doing it for them?
Yeah.
Because, okay, so Murphy's are not in the industrial world. They're probably making an assumption that residential is a higher value use, which actually, what we say to our planners now in Savills is if somebody has industrial land and they go for a residential planning application, check with us first, because they might be devaluing their site by doing so right at the moment. Even in the current climate where yields and industrial values have softened a bit, industrial land values are still very, very high. So that there's a presumption, and also they'll be talking to architects, and architects are the only people who I know who promote use Class E because it's an easy design for them. And actually they don't, yeah, sorry, there's architect, but perhaps might want to have a question now, but there's architects. Whenever you ask an architect, can you do industrial, the answer is always yes. Okay, they always say yes. And then, then we get a scheme, and you only take one look at it and know that actually, no, they haven't, because they tend to design loads of B1C as being the main thing. But actually, the overwhelming demand for space in London is the B8 sector. So we talked about the lifts, okay? So if one of you got stuck in that lift coming up here today, okay, you don't want your lift engineer to come trotting in from, I don't know, Houghton Regis or somewhere, do you? You want them around the corner so they can come with the spare parts. And lift engineers, that's an engineering function. Actually, they need B8 space, logistics space, because actually they just need a depot for all of their equipment and for their spare parts. So they need B8 space. So the people who look after the office blocks need B8 space. It's not just about parcel delivery. There's a much wider range of essential services that we all need that require B8. Okay, so then I'll ask the question, why use Class E? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's completely the wrong space, except it sits cosily next to residential, okay? But it's a tiny, tiny, really small part of the market. And if actually you want to provide services to your residents, then you actually need B8. It's essential.
Well, that's what I thought they were trying to make a kind of makerspace, nice village type feel, which is all very nice, but it wasn't policy compliant. But I'm just surprised that a site of that scale wouldn't talk to someone like yourselves to say the industrial values are incredible. Policy is saying go for it.
We might have talked to them. I think they are talking to people in our industry, but I don't know why what's happened's happened. But another thought could be, as a progression of that, is that if you take B8, B2, what was B1C, the values will be different. So if you think about why somebody needs to be somewhere, they won't be there unless they have to be. They don't do this for fun. They do it because they have to be. So optimization of location. If you've got people consuming, the B8 end of the function probably has to be there. Whereas what we're seeing is some of the B2 people are going, below this, I'm going out. You know, we've got a glass manufacturer moved out from Park Royal to Milton Keynes. Their rent probably went from the, mid to high 20s they were paying in Park Royal to 9. You know, and they don't need to be in Park Royal. Okay, they've got a staff issue. They've got to sort themselves out and make their staff, get those who are going to move, and those who aren't going to stay. So that B2 group, there's a lot of people looking about, do I really need to stay here and pay this rent? Or if I own my facility, I could sell this for a load of money and go and reset up somewhere else. So a lot of that going on. And then the B1C, the E-class, they don't really pay a lot of rent. They struggle. So they're the ones as well, and I think we will need, affordable, properly need it, because otherwise this group are going to really struggle to pay those premium rents. So that maybe when they looked at it, if it was E-class that would suit, and they don't want to pay the premium rent. And then there's another bit on all of that the real inner London boroughs, the land value is the highest. You're competing with the highest land values for other uses. You start to get to an inflection point where our customers are going, I don't actually need to be that far in. I could get into the middle of London from a little bit further out, maybe on the North Circular for argument's sake, which then gets all the tensions between the boroughs going, well, why do we have to service this borough? So, but from an operator point of view, they're not looking at it at borough level. They're looking at it at optimization around access within certain drive times to effectively spending and chimney pots, number of people. So they're looking at, what consumption is going on in a particular market and how quickly they can get goods into that market, the penetration into that market.
And have you as a planning authority taken advice on what's the best sort of layout for your borough, your own independent advice? Because, whoever Murphy's are using will say whatever they're paying them to say, I suspect, because that seems to be how a lot of these things get through.
So I was involved in the kind of framework, the SPD, and we did speak to not industrial providers, but it was when the GLA was first doing their policy, so they were doing those, what they called, basically typologies of what we were talking about, multi-stack, or how you could mix it with residential. So we took that view, and then we were also talking to transport consultants about whether the junctions could handle big lorries. It turns out they couldn't, but it would be perfect for a B8, for instance, like last mile or something like that. So yeah, we did that work to that extent,
okay.
But B2 was never going to work, but B8 certainly.
But I think the thing about last mile is that's great. It's probably serviced to your households on vans or electric fleet, etc. But your goods in are probably still on an HGV.
And that is a real issue, because if it still is, that's probably, if in a weird way, if everyone said, no, you can't run an HGV, and I get shot by my customers for saying this, but into London, that changes the building typologies and everything, because trying to get HGVs up in the air is really difficult. They're heavy, they're big, they don't turn very well. And so, but interestingly, we've been doing monitoring on loads of schemes, and actually the number of HGVs on a logistic scheme in Park Royal, for argument's sake, would be about 3% are HGVs. And talking to some of our haulier customers, they're going, I talked to one in particular, he said, I don't want my guys driving in London anymore because it's really scary for them. Imagine if they hit a cyclist. We all think about the cyclist, think about the driver. It affects them for the rest of their life. He doesn't want to take that work with an HGV. Now, you talk to somebody like Royal Mail, and they still have to use it, so it's not gone away, but I genuinely think we're going to be on a world where we're seeing more electric vehicles. Something like the Volta truck, if you Google that, it's about a 40% payload of an HGV. It's about a 10-metre length. It's like a 10-metre box truck. It's a lot more progressive to what we might need to see in London. But that will cost more, because if you can't move as much stuff, it costs you more.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Maybe from an architect.
Hi there, John Mulhare from Momentum Transport. I'm interested in the comments on lifts. It seems to me that there's a stigma about the use of lifts, and people just think, 20 years ago using lifts they'd break down, but the technology has obviously moved forward now. We work obviously on a lot of new tower-led schemes in central London, and in the Section 106 agreement now you have to get to 25%, 50% of consolidation, so demand is growing. I suppose my question really is, there must be so many sites that are discounted because a ramp can't work. and then people are worried about lifts. So is it not about trying to convince the end user that lifts can be the solution? We just need to build in more contingency. And that seems like the challenge, is that there must be sites out there with lifts, and to your point as well, it's not huge trucks that we need to get to different levels.
Can I answer that?
Go on, you go for it.
Yeah, so with the lifts, it's not just about the lift. Breaking down is one element of it, but actually it's, how's that lift used? And are there multiple occupiers who are sharing that lift? Because, when you're in an office building, somebody else goes up on the lift and 30 seconds later, in theory, it should be back at you. But a truck can spend half an hour using a goods lift. And if you're relying on your neighbours to be able to use the goods lift, how considerate they're going to be. So this is going to be space which is quite difficult to let. So you also have to think about the loading area at ground level. How much space have you got for queuing vehicles? Because they'll be waiting on those lifts. And so you need an awful lot more space than, for not cause a traffic problem. And you say you're in transport, you don't want tailbacks down the highway, do you? So you've got to have enough space actually on site for waiting vehicles. So there's a lot to that. There's a lot of mustering needed sometimes when you're waiting for the lifts to be used. So you need to have plenty of lifts. So for goods lifts, I read loading door, and how many occupiers can I let buildings to who I say to them, well, you have to share your loading door with your neighbour. They look at the neighbour and think, well, I actually don't like the look of them. They're not going to be very considerate.
They might steal my stuff.
They might nick your stuff as well. So there is actually, so there's an efficiency point about the lifts, and there's a security point about the lifts, and there's a highways point about the lifts, and there's a loading area and waiting point about the lifts. So it's not just, and lifts, we'll let those buildings in the current market where there's no supply and there's no other choice. The minute we have an economic downturn, which we may or may not be facing now, occupiers will choose conventional buildings, because driving your truck up to your own loading door and opening it and getting on with your own business and then driving off is way more attractive than anything you can say to them about how well maintained a goods lift is.
Okay, I think
Can I just give two very quick, and totally agree with everything Bridget has said, 2 points. What we were going down that route is conveyors and chutes are far more attractive if you've got vertical movement of goods. Because conveyor, you can get on it, you can clamber on it, you can pick stuff up, and a chute uses gravity. So that's one bit rather than a lift. But then you've got the mucky bit about managing all of that and people's flow and whose product is on it, etc., etc. And I think the second bit, can you convince customers to do it? We're sitting there thinking, how do we convince customers to go into a multi-level building where they can take trucks up? And that's enough of, I'm trying to convince them to do that first. Well, you're going, it's like at the minute, as Bridget said, unless there's frankly no other supply, I think it's going to be really difficult.
There's an interesting development. You've got V Park, which is Seagro's now doing. So that's a St George joint venture, which is in
and I think that's going to be makerspace. That's what I've been.
Yeah. So that's what you described as 6 lifts as 100,000 square feet. So for a conventional industrial building, 100,000 square feet would probably have about 12 loading doors. It's got half the capacity for loading than a conventional industrial building, and it's going to probably be multiple occupiers. But I'm pretty pleased to see that St George have got a joint venture with Seagro, because Seagro know what they're doing. They're a competitor of my 2 colleagues here, but they've done a lot of urban industrial, and I'd like to see them make it work, because actually, frankly, if they can't make it work, then it's never going to work. So watch V Park, in Alperton, and let's see what happens there. It's under construction now.
Thanks, Bridget. And I think that's a good point, perhaps, to draw it to a close. I think 2 of the kind of key takeaways for me, one are, it's not straightforward doing multi-level industrial or mixed use, but it's still early days, and it will be interesting to see how, for example, Seagro get on then with that development, and indeed the developments that we've got in Southwark for mixed use. And the other thing I think is social value. So is there more that the industry can do with local authorities to kind of shine a light on the social value which has been delivered by industrial and logistics space? But if I could thank